The gardeners have planted white roses when I specifically asked for red.
You could always paint the roses red.
What an odd thing to say.
I'm child-free, and the freedom it gives me not only in my finances, but my entire life is something I wouldn't trade for the world.
I have an incredible nephew, I mentor younger women, I have a big loving family, and a fulfilled life. My worth in this world is more than just any one title, and yours is too.
Young people seemingly aren't wanting to have kids or are aspiring to be parents anymore, and the reasons why may shock you. Or not. Hey guys, what's up? It's Imurgency and welcome back to my channel. Today we're here talking about Gen Z and Millennials this time. Hey guys, what's up? And specifically about the conversation that's been going on online about the concept of not wanting kids or pushing back having kids until later in life. And this isn't just something that's going on with the people that are actually giving birth to the children, but more a widespread sentiment around the entire generation. With the stats showing that around 1 in 3 Gen Zers and Millennials not having or wanting children, and the gradually declining birth rate in the US, and also with other countries in the world, it really has made people not of this generation start to wonder why this is and what the general sentiment around young people is around starting a family or not. And in this video, we're going to talk about just that because I think this is a very interesting conversation and is one that I feel like we all kind of have with our friends or to ourselves that I think would be good to have in a more general sense. We're digging into the history of the American family culture, talking about the real reasons why young people are kind of averse to starting a family in the current day, as well as getting into the conversation over whether it is selfish or selfless to choose to be a parent in modern day, among many other topics we really are going to yap for this video. So if you are new around here and you have not seen my face before, hello, my name is Rumi, nice to meet you. Consider subscribing because we talk about all things to do with Gen Z culture, both real and pop. And also while you're at it, don't forget to leave a like on this video because it helps out a ton with YouTube algorithm, as well as follow me on my socials at Imurgency on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. You can also be sure to catch these videos over on Spotify on my Spotify show, also called Imurgency. So the link for that will be in the description below as well. But promo aside, I think in order to start the conversation around why Gen Z or like why young people are choosing to delay starting a family or just choosing not to as a whole, we need to understand the historical culture around families in the Western world. And I think the hallmark of the classic American family starts with the concept of the nuclear family. The nuclear family is a term used to describe a family unit that consists of 2 parents and their children, usually on average also around 2, living in one house together. The framework of the nuclear family was said to have gained popularity in the US during the post-war era as soldiers returned back home and to society, wanting to move towards a more stable lifestyle, economically, socially, and emotionally, after experiencing the devastating traumas that did occur during World War II. You'd see a lot of imagery romanticizing the idea of the working husband, the stay-at-home mom, and typically 2 one boy, one girl kids with their white picket fence that became the symbol of the American family, the good old-fashioned American dream. And you'd see this all the time in popular media back then and also in more recent times. This representation thus put an explicit emphasis of the values of marriage and the family unit in this country. This is where you'd see the rise of sentiments, at least in the West, of like family being the most important end all be all and not really needing or seeking support in an emotional or physical sense outside of your family. Until of course your kids were of age to then start their own families. This really started this sense of self-sufficiency within the nuclear family. But you know, of course, it is unhealthy and unrealistic to expect all of the needs of your life to be satisfied or the responsibility of satisfying or catering to those needs be wrapped up mainly in only 3 people in your life, and realistically in a full capacity only with 1 person, that being your spouse. So while the idea in mind was that the nuclear family would provide that financial and emotional stability, with the having the ideal like 2 loving parents of it all, that wasn't always necessarily the case, as many of us know from either personal experience or through representations of families in media. And it goes without saying that relying only on your partner and solely prioritizing your home and your family can be very isolating, and it's deeply entrenched in our culture. We live in a very isolating society, and we think about that usually in the sense of like the loneliness epidemic that we were all going through. But that also can be argued to be the case of the traditional family unit. It was intended to be isolatory, you solely and primarily focusing on you and yours before engaging with the world or engaging with other people in your community, making the act of forming community more inconvenient and more of a chore because it's not something that was inherently incentivized to do. That's not to say that Americans by and large just don't have community, because that's not true. But I feel like people that have that strong sense of community, especially nowadays, are more so the exceptions exceptions than the rule. It's why we see so many people not know their neighbors, or why when you do try and reach out to a neighbor, it feels very uncomfortable because both parties are not necessarily used to that. And of course, that aspect varies depending on where you are in the country and what your community necessarily looks like. But the traditional nuclear family structure really does uphold putting your partner on a pedestal and inherently devalues the importance of having or building community. Because when you think about it, your family unit is your community. It's the only community that really matters. And within that, there can be the sense of hierarchy, that being the breadwinner, the caretaker, and then the children. And in this traditional nuclear family setup, I think it's important to acknowledge the inherent patriarchy that exists in those traditional family structures, giving the traditional breadwinner father and caretaker wife dynamic when it comes to things like decision making and power in the relationship, because we live in a consumerist society where the dollar and the dollar amount that you have and own affords you power and influence. The breadwinner in the household is usually seen as the head or the lead of the household, being the one to make the majority of the decisions because it's their money being used to finance and support the entire family. And the peak popularity of the nuclear family came at a time where a woman's role was defined by her husband, oftentimes leaving her in sole care of the kids. And a quote from the Bell Hooks book, "Feminism is for everybody passionate politics. In a culture which holds the two-parent patriarchal family in a higher esteem than any other arrangement, all children must feel emotionally insecure when their family does not measure up to the standard. A utopian vision of the patriarchal family remains intact despite all evidence which proves that the well-being of children is no more secure in the dysfunctional male-headed household than in the dysfunctional female-headed household." And now to bring it to more modern times, what does the family structure that Gen Z grew up with look like? Well, according to the Pew Research Center, in 1970, 67% of Americans aged 25 to 49 were living with their spouse and one or more children younger than 18. So basically the white picket fence nuclear family of it all. But that number has dropped significantly over the past 5 decades, now landing on a middling 37% in 2021, which is a big 30% drop. And as the data suggests, the nuclear family is not necessarily the norm or the majority anymore of families, especially considering that the American family unit has diversified over the years, specifically in relation to the family living arrangements. Gen Z is by and large grown up with a more diverse range of family structures and family units, giving us a wider range of what a home looks like. Categories of this in the Pew Research article include families that are married with kids, cohabiting with kids, unpartnered with kids, married with no kids, cohabiting with no kids, and other family members. And this is especially interesting because the categories with no kids and categories with other family members has been increasing, more so now than ever before historically. The pipeline of getting married and automatically having kids has been slowing down, and that in part is due to the normalization and the visibility of other routes of life. Getting married and having kids is no longer seen as the main way to show your responsibility as an adult. And I personally think that that's a good step forward for us. But on the topic of responsibility, when it comes to the responsible financial decision of earning points on your groceries, travel, and basically anything else you buy, I think that it's also equally as important and responsible to be earning points on your rent, one of our biggest monthly expenses. And that is why I'm so happy to talk about this video sponsor, Built. Built has changed the game by letting renters earn points on rent and around their neighborhoods. And there's honestly so much that you can do with Built points. Built points can be transferred to some of your favorite hotels and airlines, and even ones you haven't heard of yet. And that's because there's over 500 airlines and over 700,000 hotels and properties around the world that you can redeem your Built points towards. I've personally been renting almost all of my adult life thus far, and I always think about how I'm missing out on getting points back from the rent I pay each and every month. But by paying my rent through Built, I'm able to get a little bit more bang for my buck. They've consistently been ranked the highest value points currency by both the Points Guy and Bankrate, and they're truly designed to fit your everyday lifestyle. Like I said, you can redeem those points towards flights, hotels, workout classes, or even towards your next month's rent payment. And if all of that sounds interesting to you, you can start earning points right now when you sign up through the link in my description or by scanning the QR code on screen. And make sure to use my URL while you're at it so they know I sent you. Thanks so much, Bill, for sponsoring this section of the video. Let's talk more specifically about why Gen Z and millennials aren't having kids. So what shifted? Why aren't we wanting to be parents? Well, as of 2024, the US birth rate dropped 3%, reaching a historic low according to the CDC, with the birth rates continuing to decline for women aged 20 to 39, that being millennials and Gen Z. And I'm sure if you are Gen Z or a young millennial, you already know some of these reasons that are contributing to this drop, but let's take a look anyway. One of the major factors that's contributing to this is the general delay in life stages and in love for our generation. Like, we've gone deep into these topics over delayed life stages and not not finding love until later in previous videos, so definitely go check those out if you haven't already. But we just generally are taking a longer time to find a partner, and especially one that we like enough to consider actually having children with them. And I know that it may seem through celebrities and other people that you see online that people are just popping out kids left and right, but truly for the majority of people, it's a struggle enough finding someone that you could tolerate, let alone have a baby by. But these delays in life stages like dating, like marriage, like having kids are truly due to intertwined factors such as the economy, the job market, the housing market, and the modern dating sphere. With all these things empowering and almost incentivizing people to remain child-free in their adulthood and to prioritize other life choices. Also, as an aside, showing how politics affect the social and straight couples, one of the reasons why people may not be as quick to marry is because people have more rights now, thankfully. I mean, like, not all the way, and especially maybe not now, but like definitely more than like the 1940s for now. For example, back in the day, women couldn't get credit, which meant that they couldn't own their own houses or properties without the cosign of a man, which is actually insane, until the Equal Credit Opportunity Act of 1974, which is a lot more recent than y'all give credit for. Like, for a lot of us, our parents were alive during that time. And of course, this was one of many barriers that oppressed peoples have faced and continue to face on a day-to-day basis. But having more of these freedoms has opened up so many different opportunities for different lives you could lead. Now, you can live a life that doesn't depend on you having a family or having kids, that gives you some semblance of rights or liberties. But moving on, let's talk about more reasons as to why we aren't having kids, or why more young people are choosing not to. And I have to point this finger at y'all, because I asked y'all for your thoughts in a poll in my community tab section. Definitely be sure to vote in those when I do post them, so you can be included in videos like this. But your answers were truly enlightening. I asked the question, would you bring kids into the world right now? And out of a response pool of around 8,600, 63% of you said that you would not and do not want to bring kids into the world right now. With the second most popular response also being, no, you wouldn't bring kids in the world, but you still kind of want to. And I think that that's so interesting, because I can't say that a sample of 8,600 people accounts for the millions of people that are in Gen Z. And especially some of the comments that are left under that poll as well are very telling. With one user saying that I'm a 25-year-old woman still living at home with my parents. Even if I wanted kids, how could I support them when I can't even afford to support myself? And another saying that the world, or at least the US, doesn't support us having children at all. We don't have the opportunity to get jobs that could have us making enough money to afford taking care of a family. And these are both very real responses, and kind of lead me into my next point around why we're not wanting to have children. And that's because of the general economic pressures and the lack of feasibility of having kids right now. Times are hard. My last video talked extensively about how times are very hard, and just generally everyone right now, like, times are a lot harder than they have been. And to y'all's sentiment, it's very hard to think about sustaining another life and committing yourself to taking care of and supporting financially, emotionally, physically, whatever, another person when you are struggling to make ends meet for yourself. And the data is supporting this. More millennials and Gen Z are moving back with their parents than ever, with roughly 1 in 3 adults aged 18 to 34 in the US living with at least one of their parents. While looking at Gen Z more specifically, a little over 50% of Gen Z say that they don't make enough money to live the way that they want, and the high cost of living is the main financial struggle. So like I said, seeing that this generation of young adults is struggling to put food on the table, is struggling and having a hard time affording a life of their own, children might not necessarily be on the table right now. And when you are struggling like this, it's hard to think about wanting to have kids. It's hard to think about that even being a possibility until your situation is a little bit better. So I'd argue that while there is still a large population of people that like just never want to have kids, and that's very real, it also is true that there also is a population of people that do want to have kids, but there's nothing really there to support that decision, like whether that be socially, politically, or economically. And let's dig into that really quick, because I don't think we talk enough about the cost of being a parent, and specifically for women, the cost of giving birth. Like, that is insanely high, because maternity costs can be so unpredictable. From what your insurance can and will cover, to the different types of individualized care that you need as a patient, and you never know what you're gonna need until you're actually in the situation. Like, some people think that they're gonna have a natural birth and they need to have a C-section. Some people don't think that they're gonna want or need an epidural, but then the time comes and the pain comes and you're like, oh yeah, girl, give me the epidural. And that all varies the cost, and because of the American healthcare system, none of that is cheap at all. For a C-section birth, the national median cost is $37,653.69 out of network. In network though, it's just a cute little $16,943.79. You know, just pocket change. And for a pum pum delivery, I can't say the actual word for monetization reasons, but for the pum pum delivery, out of network is around $28,000 and in network is around $13,000. So again, nothing cheap here. And the price tag for having kids doesn't just stop at having birth. I think that's actually where it starts. Because then you think about things like childcare, housing, suitable transportation, clothing, food, and those are just like the immediate things. And all of that really adds up. And especially for new parents, this is all compounded by the fact that as we mentioned in the past video, you see how everything's connected? Like if you tap into the Imurgency cinematic universe, you really get a dab of all things going on in culture right now, period. But as we talked about previously, like the mass layoffs that are going on right now, the subpar working conditions for those that still do have jobs, in addition to the rising gig economy for young adults, means that many people don't have reliable insurance, and two, many people don't have reliable work-life balance or a substantial amount of parental time off for both parents, which means that if you are going to be working, you kind of do have to have some form of childcare.
A woman in my town's Facebook group shared these daycare rates today, and she said, how do you afford kids here? Because nobody knows how anybody is paying for this. For an infant for 5 days a week with 10 hours of care, it is $664 a week. That is just shy of $35,000 a year for one child. And the price does not drop that much when they hit pre-K here. It's $521 a week, which is about like $28,000 a year, okay? These are incredibly high rates for daycare. And of course, you could drop down to 9 hours a day or whatever it might be. But here's the thing. When you go to daycare, typically you're going to take the most hours because you have to commute to work, you have to commute back from work, and you have to work 8 hours a day. And unfortunately, when you miss pickup by 1 minute, they start charging you like $2 a minute. So usually it's more cost effective just to pay the higher rate for the 10 hours than to pay for the 9 hours, which is like crazy because it's 1 hour difference. This is not just a parent problem, right? But like people constantly are looking at adults who are married or of, birthing years and saying, why aren't you having kids? And we're looking around saying, how could we possibly have kids when we can't even afford to buy a house? We're going to start off with daycare because daycare is incredibly expensive. And so we were paying about $3,000 a month in January of last year. That is for 2 kids in full-time daycare. There was a toddler and a preschooler, and that was $3,080 a month. It did increase significantly in August when they had their annual rate increase. So you'll notice a significant jump there. The total was $38,525. Last year, we had an after-school nanny for our 2 older kids who are in first grade and kindergarten because their school gets out at 3 o'clock and we don't stop working at 3 o'clock. And so we needed some help in the afternoons. It was about $2,000 a month, coming out to $14,000 for the year. She did end in July. Because we no longer have an after-school nanny, we now do after-school care. And so they don't charge you monthly. They charge you for like a 6-week session. And so these are the payments I've made so far. We've spent about $6,000 this year. And this smaller number here is just for half days we had to pay for. And the last thing is summer camp. We spent over $8,000 for summer camp for our 2 older kids because in the summer they don't have school and we were still working full time. And mind you, this is not a sleepaway camp or anything like that. This is a day camp. It's usually from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. and some of them have extended day programs. And so it all just depends. But yes, $8,000 for camp. All combined, it is a whopping total of $66,866 for childcare.
And as a generation, if you are choosing to have kids and aren't living with your parents, you then have to fight with the reality that like as Gen Z and as millennials, we don't really have a community like that to help you take care of the kids. So it's more of a struggle to figure out how is that going to work if you can't afford childcare. Because again, if you're a young person, your friends are likely also struggling too. And I'm sure that someone will probably be down to help you, but like it's likely not going to be enough time to truly care for your kid around the clock. And all of that's not considering the fact that like things like climate change and the political state of the world right now can and is a big deterrent for people entertaining the idea of starting a family. You often hear the discourse over people feeling like it's selfish to bring a kid in the world right now. Given the economic state, climate change being a real thing that would likely impact the early years of our kids' lives, and the political and educational practicality of the world right now. Like we all know the political state of the world right now, or at least the political state of the US right now. And teachers have been sounding alarm bells for years, talking about how the education system is failing so many kids. And one of the answers to that problem from the government was to get rid of the Department of Education. So even educating kids right now is very rough, pushing more responsibility on the parent to either homeschool or figure it out through like a charter school or a private school. Money. But these are all real things that young people are considering as they're growing up and thinking like, do I want to have kids in this world right now?
I've been seeing a lot of takes lately that are like, this is the worst time in history to have kids. If you have kids right now, you're selfish. The world is ending. And initially I disagreed. But then I thought about it, and low-key, y'all are right. This is the worst time to have children. But it's not because the world is in such significant state of disrepair. It's because y'all hate children. There is no village, there's no community, there's no additional support or extra care. If there are resources available, which are fewer and fewer by the day, you are picked on and looked down upon for taking advantage of those resources. I mean, y'all do not like children. I mean, there was once a whole children should be seen and not heard era, and that was pretty bad. But y'all have taken that into children should neither be seen nor heard. We don't want to deal with them until they're like fully functioning adults in society that won't get on my personal nerve. Like, yes, the world is bleak. Yes, the world is dark. Unfortunately, it always has been. But the biggest kid-specific difference that makes raising children right now uniquely difficult is that y'all do not like kids. You don't want to be a part of anybody's village or community. And no matter how y'all try to disguise that as caring for children, children are the ones who pay the price of that.
The general lack of support of current parents right now, both socially and politically, are unprecedented, which again, another deterrent. Like I said, childcare is difficult to afford and to sustain. The amount of spaces, not just for babies and young children, but also like preteens and teens to exist in publicly are dwindling down more than ever, with the death of spaces like malls, arcades, or other third places that kids would typically hang around. Like, while there have been very well documented worse times to have children, it still doesn't invalidate the fact that times right now still are bad. And the lack of resources right now for people that do choose to have kids are a little concerning. Now that we've talked about some of the reasons why people haven't had kids, let's talk about some of the pushback to that. Like, there really is a societal pressure to have kids because that has been the norm for so many years. And we've seen now, especially very publicly, people come out against their sort of rebellion against the nuclear family structure. Like, for example, there are groups of people that inherently think that those that don't want to have families or those that don't want to have kids are bad people, and not wanting to have kids is a bad thing. People that are family traditionalists, like the current vice president, for example. You have very common stereotypes in the zeitgeist, characterizing women who don't have kids as crazy cat ladies, or lonely, or jaded, or basically anything else negative under the sun, implying that, oh, a woman can't be fulfilled in life if she does not serve the purpose of producing children or being a wife, which is especially ridiculous when you realize that the stereotype for men who don't have kids, or some kind of guy that just can't commit or be like tied down, like the sentiment is very different. Like, y'all really just hate women. And through a lot of comments from our leadership, like, for example, the vice president, asking questions like, how does it make any sense that we've turned our country over to people that don't really have a stake in it? Referring to Kamala Harris and AOC, both not having children. Again, implying that being an individual, for one, is not enough, and two, if you are not serving the purpose of having children, you are not worthy of having an opinion. And thankfully, this is more of a fringe, extreme point of view, but there are also more subtle ways that even in our culture, we reward people for being married and having kids. Like, just think of the number of celebrations we have for it. You have things like baby showers, gender reveal parties, engagement parties, weddings, anniversaries, and so on. And this is not to say that we should party less or that these things aren't valuable and should be things to celebrate, because they are great achievements. But it can be something that we can look at and wonder, why don't we celebrate other parts of our lives, like things like friendship, career, or life goals as much, or to the same degree as we do these other things? And that inherently is because societally, we don't see them as the same caliber or level of importance as getting married or having kids. Like, it's truly the societal default to have kids and to get married. And women disproportionately get questioned all the time for like why they are choosing not to have kids, as opposed to people asking like, oh, why do you want to have kids, you know? And I think that that's very telling. Having kids has always been seen as the next step after marriage, or just generally the next step of adulthood, but I think that people have been publicly challenging that over the past several years. In a quote from licensed psychologist Dr. Linda Baggett, who is also the owner of Well Woman Psychology, she states that, I think that current generations are feeling more empowered to be open about and act on this preference, whereas in past generations, people may have been more likely to have children anyway, due to societal expectations, economic labor factors, and religious beliefs. And I think that that's very real. Like, a lot of these factors and pressures are still definitely there, as we've talked about previously in this video, but by and large, I do think that there is a more widespread push to normalize and make it not a crime to not want or to not have kids, both as a woman and as a man. Because while the majority of backlash when it comes to things like this does happen to be pit on women, due to the way that society loves to scrutinize and shame women, men also do receive some pushback for just being too old without kids. Like I said, there is that bachelor stereotype, but a lot of times, especially in families and communities where it's more so normalized for a man to find a wife or to find a partner and to settle down, the childless by choice movement has been picking up steam from across social platforms, with many people, mostly women, speaking out about their intentional and conscious choice to not have kids. And these generally range from people that have always known that they don't want to have kids, to ones that have realized at an older age that their want or need, that their desire to become a mother just came from socialization at a very young age. And this is where we can really give a shout out and highlight the child-free content creators, because some of them get the nastiest, most misogynistic comments and engagement for simply just not wanting kids, which again is a personal choice and not to bash anyone that does choose to have kids, but it is important to show that that is an option, to choose to not have kids and to be perfectly fine. And to demonstrate that having kids isn't necessarily the next step that everyone needs to take at the same time or on the same timeline. Because at least on social media, it's been portrayed that way for years. Like, think to the countless family channels that exploit their children for views. It really just shows how important it is to show these different paths of life, because motherhood is something that's so ingrained in our culture, especially in young girls and young women growing up, where like motherhood is seen as the default, which it isn't inherently, and that's okay.
For as long as I've known, I thought I wanted to have kids. Now that I'm at that age where I have to decide whether or not I want to freeze my eggs, I've actually started to think that I perhaps don't want to have kids. Back in the day when I saw a baby, I was the first person to volunteer to hold that baby. I just saw a newborn baby yesterday and a bunch of toddlers, and it was the first time where I didn't have the urge to want to hold the baby. The sight of the screaming kids really started to repulse me. Every time I get done with work, the thought of having to come home to a child, I'm like, thank goodness I don't have one, because if I did, I think I would be over the edge. I truly value my freedom, and the thought that I have to give it up to take care of a child, like, I just don't want to do that. If I were to have kids, the only way I would have it is if I had help, like if I had a nanny, if I had a cleaner, because I don't know if I want to sacrifice my hobbies for a kid. And for those who are going to come at me being like, oh, like, who's going to take care of you when you're old? That's selfish. Other thing that I am afraid of as well is that when you get older, your friendships do change, especially with life changes that I've noticed already, like with my friends who have kids. Everyone just talks about mom things, and I don't really have anything to add. I know that if I choose not to have a kid, I'm probably going to be isolated away from those groups of people, and I'm going to have to find new friends who are child-free as well.
In a study done by the Pew Research Center that studied a group of 50-plus-year-olds that didn't have kids and those younger than 50 who were sure that they weren't going to have kids, they found that the majorities in both groups say that not having kids has made it easier for them to afford the things that they want, the time for hobbies and interests, and to save for the future. And the younger group, about 6 in 10, also say that not having kids made it easier for them to be successful in their job or career and to have an active social life, which goes to show that people who don't have kids can and do have fulfilled lives later in life, despite what stereotypes and societal pressures may suggest. And this point transitions us to the whole debate over, is it selfish or selfless to want to have kids or not? And I think that this is such a nuanced conversation and such an interesting conversation, because it really does depend on who you ask and what you mean by selfish and selfless. Because there's this notion online, and you'll see a lot of videos online of people saying like, oh, I'm not ready to stop being selfish for myself and living for myself, implying that like when you have kids, you kind of have to give up that selfish side of yourself, which in large part is true. Like, the hesitation to have kids and to push that later in life is not always just because you don't want to have kids, but it sometimes can be because you are kind of afraid of parenthood and are not necessarily 100% ready to dedicate yourself 100% to another human being for the rest of your life. And that's valid. And honestly, I think that this is something that people should consider a lot more before they choose to have kids. Like, again, I know this whole video has so far focused on like the not wanting to have kids aspect of it. I don't want to make it seem like I'm trying to say that you shouldn't. I think like you should have agency and the option to do whatever you want to do, whether it be have a kid or not. But I do want to talk about and desensitize a lot of the stigmas that come with having kids, as well as like not in the younger generation. But I really do think that it should be more of an intentional choice, specifically around the conversation of having kids, because I think a lot of times, and this might be a hot take, a lot of times the topic of like having kids of your own is spoken about very similarly to how someone would talk about getting a new car or a house or planning a wedding or any other type of like luxury material milestone. Like, a lot of times people talk about, oh, I want my kids around this time, I want them to be like this, I'm just really excited to create a family that's going to be exactly like this, this, and this, and I really want to make sure that I'm creating a family that's going to be there to take care of me when I'm older. Like, I think sometimes the way that we talk about having kids makes it seem very similar to one of those things that you like wait a long time for, and one of those things that's just like planned on happening, and you kind of sensationalize and almost itemize the whole process of being a parent without really outwardly confronting the fact that like it isn't just like a cute quirky little thing that you do. With you're bringing an entire new human being into the world that you then have to take care of, shape, and mold for the rest of your life. And whether you like it or not, there are real sacrifices that come with that. And one of those sacrifices, at least in the immediate short term while you're adjusting to everything, is sacrificing your quality of life. Being a parent is one of the hardest things that you can do. Some say it's the most rewarding thing that you can do, but in my opinion, it should also be one of the most intentional things that you do. And that's not to say that you need to intend having a child all the time. Like, whether or not you intended to have the child, once the child is there, I believe that you need to be very intentional with how you raise the child and how you are there for your child, because that is an entire human being. And knowing how so many of us come out after having less than stellar family upbringings, it's a very valid fear and concern for a lot of us young people to not want to put ourselves and our potential children in the position to go through the similar things. And also valid on the potential parent to like not want to give up that side of their life yet, like to want to wait or just to not do it at all. Because it's truly one of those things that change your life for the rest of your life, because you're never going to get your life truly back in the same way that it was prior to having children. And that can be for better or for worse, but that is a change that you have to be ready for. And the people call the aversion to wanting that as like being selfish, or like still wanting that time to be selfish or really focus on yourself before you become selfless as a parent and give yourself to another human being for the rest of your life. But honestly, I would argue, and again, another hot take, that oftentimes pushing for a child when you know that you cannot provide for that child or be there for that child, whether that be financially, emotionally, or physically, can be truly considered the selfish option. Like wanting a kid for any other reason than creating and nurturing another life is inherently selfish, because you're bringing another person on this world to experience all that this world has to offer, all the great. But if you're not really in a position to really care for your child, and again, this does not just mean financially, but you're doing it to like either salvage a relationship or prove to yourself or others that you can be a good parent, then that is an inherently selfish reason. Again, not saying that it is also inherently bad to be selfish, but that is something that you kind of got to own, because we've seen way too often so many kids be brought into the world and then having parents that do nothing to support or really love them after they're here, essentially bringing another person in the world to endure a level of trauma and or suffering that they just did not ask for. And of course, many of us are already victims of our own circumstances, and a lot of societal factors do play into why parents aren't able to show up in a way that they maybe want to in certain situations, because again, everything's connected, but like the point kind of still stands. And also another thing, when it comes to parenthood, I think one thing that this whole debate does not usually address is like adoption. Like adoption is so a thing. You don't need to always have your own kids. Like I know the whole debate over having kids doesn't necessarily matter with like whose kids they are. It's the old fact of like raising somebody else. But I think that adoption kids and foster kids are oftentimes sort of left out of the conversation when it comes to wanting child care or wanting to care for a child or raising a kid yourself, because there are a plethora of people that are already in this world and already have to deal with the things in the world that are looking for and would love to have a family to love and support them. Now, I know that this has been a long video, so we will end with this final point. And this is more of a fun, sort of chit-chatty sort of point, and honestly something that's more relatable to both sides, like people that have kids and those that don't. And that is the drastic difference in lifestyles between those who have kids and those who do not. Like we need to talk about this difference in lifestyles because it is very apparent, because the experience is just so vastly different. And this isn't to say that couples can never have single friends or vice versa, or like young people who have kids can't be friends with people who don't. That's not the point. I am saying though that there is a common disparity in just general life experience and priority in people's lives that cause a lot of friction in these sort of friendships and relationships, because it's something that's so different and so novel and hard to balance at times, because oftentimes you just don't get it. Like having a family can change your life so drastically. Like we see it even like when people get like partners, like when people get a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a husband or a wife, most people tend to see their single friends less and less and prioritize their partner more and more. Again, not saying this is a good thing at all, but that's just what tends to happen, again, with the family unit of it all. Like for a more extreme example, like think you're a working parent now who gets 2 weeks off per year. So with those 2 weeks, you choose to go on a family vacation as opposed to a trip with your friend group. You see your friends just less and less. You get invited to your friends' birthdays at the club, but your kids have to go to bed by 8 and you have work in the morning, you can't get a sitter. So again, you choose not to show up. Like, of course, these are all like smaller choices in people's lives, but like the small things add up. Like these are all choices that have an impact on your friendships and in your community. Like showing up for people is important. And it just so happens to be the case that when you have kids and when you have a family, there are slight shifts as to where you tend to invest your time. It goes back to the whole quote of like, everyone wants a village, but no one wants to be a villager.
I saw this on Instagram and I said, no one is like saying the thing out loud. And then I got so many DMs of people being like, you're not saying the thing either. This is a really difficult conversation because there are a lot of hurt feelings on both sides, right? This person, when you're single and childless versus a parent, right? Or like a new parent, we're talking about parents of newborns. There is a really big schism in like your lives. You are no longer the person that you were before you had kids. Your life is completely different. And the way that this country is set up, mothers especially have like no support. This is just me speaking in generalities. I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just saying that this is why there's so much resentment between the two groups, right? On Substack, I published this sociology of begging someone to marry you. And there I talked about the American obsession with the nuclear family, where I linked to this article from 2020 where the nuclear family was a mistake. And in it, David Brooks says that a lot of the reason that we see so many people begging for community, why so many people are so lonely, is because for the last 70 years in this country, we've sort of platformed the nuclear family as the ideal, right? And it's like, I come from a culture where you live in multi-generational households, you live near your family, you have your uncles, your aunts, your cousins, you have like a whole large support system so people don't feel as alone. In America, it's very different, right? You live in your little house, you spend all of your time with your partner has to be your best friend. Couples self-isolate, parents self-isolate, and then the resentment builds because they're like, why isn't anyone showing up for us? And I don't think there's the same level of reflection because, again, I'm seeing a lot of these posts. I'm speaking to a lot of people, both in real life and on podcasts, who are saying, you didn't come to my wedding, you didn't come to my bachelorette, you didn't do any of the stuff that I did for you because you had kids first. And like, now you're saying, where's my village? Where's my community? Where are my people? Where are your people? I fully understand why this separation happens, but like, there needs to be some awakening. There needs to be some truth because a lot of people don't want to acknowledge the way that they like cut people out of their lives as they move into new stages of their lives. And like, everyone is happy for you. Everyone is happy that you got married. Everyone is happy that you had a baby, but like, you need to acknowledge that sometimes friendships end and that's no one's fault. I know that Tinks talks about this a lot, but I do think people in this situation need to look back and take inventory of places where they might have dropped people because they were moving into new stages of their lives and like want to spend all of their time with their partners and their babies and like don't have time for this person anymore.
I really like this TikTok and I really love the TikToker, like shout out to Tell the Bees. But this creator makes great points that like having a baby can be a very isolating experience for both parties. Like having a baby can be isolating for the mother because your friends, as much as they will try, they just don't get it. And as the friends with no kids, it can be pretty isolating because you're never going to be chosen first. Like your friend's baby will always come first in their life and then their partner will always come second in their life because those are the closer ties. So it's hard as the person who grew up and was with that friend since before all of that, having to take more of a backseat or at least having to reinvent your friendship, which can be very hard, daunting, and isolating. And of course, when it comes to things like true community and true friendship like that, like there will always be like as the parent with the child, there will always be those friends that will come together and like help you take care of your kid, but that's not the case for everyone. Like to highlight complaints from both sides, those that are child-free and single tend to complain that like the extra workloads tend to fall on them with no extra compensation when a coworker goes on maternity or paternity leave, as opposed to companies temporarily hiring someone else. But like that is more of a company thing than anything else. Or people who have kids or a family being more dismissive of the single friend's needs and wants because they are preoccupied with everything else that's going on in their life. Along with things like not only wanting to be contacted when you're friends with kids, want a free sitter, when there wasn't any effort to maintain the friendship otherwise, as well as the judgment and questioning from friends as to when you plan to have kids as well.
So as somebody with kids, I think from my perspective, the reason why sometimes parents can get annoyed and frustrated with people who don't have kids is that it's not just that they don't want kids, but they openly insinuate that you are miserable and hate your life because you have kids. Like I personally could not give less of a about what anybody does with their lives, whether people choose to have kids or not. In fact, most of my friends don't have kids, and I don't care at all. However, a lot of my friends have no problem with just like openly talking me and the fact that I have kids right to my face. I think it's the unapologetic attitude that it would be so terrible to have kids and that you must be miserable because you have kids. That is the main issue that parents have with talking and interacting with childless people. Like it's very insulting for somebody to just to your face insinuate that your life must suck and that you're a miserable person. And I don't think they even realize what they're doing because like I said, some of my best friends in the world will just casually say this stuff to me. I don't think that it even crosses their mind that this would be hurtful to say to somebody. It's just such an invalidation to such a large part of your life and literal human beings that are a part of your family that you love. Are there weirdos that have kids that go around insinuating that childless people are miserable? Absolutely. Are there weirdos with kids that go around acting like if you don't have kids, your life isn't fulfilled? Absolutely. I totally see that, and that absolutely happens. But I'm not one of those people, and yet I constantly experience this. So in summary, I guess, ultimately, I don't feel like it's very in good faith to just say that parents are triggered by people that don't have kids because they don't have kids. I think it's more that a lot of them are very invalidating to people with kids and just insinuate that they're miserable sad people, which is super insulting.
And of course, there are complaints on the other side as well. I don't want to make this seem like it's a one-pronged approach. There are also complaints from the married people with kids side, stating things like single friends aren't as accommodating for their lifestyle, things that they have going on, as well as people just like blatantly and very weirdly asserting how much they hate kids and hate people who have kids, or openly insinuating that like you hate your life because you have kids. Like honestly, to round this out, it just seems like people don't like being judged for their choices, especially their life choices, because these life choices are personal, and it really wouldn't hurt for either side to be more intentional with what you say or do. All in all, the decision to have kids does put a different priority in people's lives, but it's important to extend both yourself grace and your friends some grace, as people choose to have different lifestyles, and having a different lifestyle from you just means that you have to extend a little bit more empathy to understand where people are going through, where people are coming from. And all of this is to say that the American family dynamic is drastically changing and is very different than it has been in past times. People are rightfully worried about who they would be as parents, as well as being more mindful about what is going on in the world and how those real life things would impact the development and the growth and the life of their children. So yeah, I think that it's completely valid that Gen Z or young millennials or whoever are choosing to not want to have kids or waiting to have kids, and not to be a both sides aspect. And it's also very valid to understand why people would still choose to have kids despite it all, because at the end of the day, children are seen as a light of hope, and having that is also very important. But yeah, that's gonna be it for this video, y'all. This video was very long. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know all of your thoughts down in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you. Do you plan on having kids / do you have kids? Be sure to let me know why or why not. Again, if you're new to the channel, then definitely subscribe, leave a like on this video, and follow me on my socials on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. But other than that, y'all, thank you so much for watching again. I've been Imurgency, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.